Welcome back to the Pixitron series of Retro Lab code for Retrofriends. Thanks for joining me today. Today really marks the first day of actively developing a game with the Pixitron engine. I've talked to Bill and he's taken a look at the videos, and as a first step I'm going to start developing an engine with just the basic concepts that we need to do a turn-based strategy game. What I did was I cloned the Pixitron Git repository, and now I've got a copy of it, Pixie Game, that I've committed to a private repo so I can work on the Pixie Game. So when you watch the video, you can follow along from a Pixitron repo copy, but we won't be publishing or making changes to the actual Pixitron starting place unless we have to support a different version of Electron. But for now, it's going to work with the 3.0.5 version of Electron and a fairly current version of Node.js or NPM as of late 2018. It should continue to work after this without any updates, as long as you follow along with this version of Electron that we're going to be using. Regardless, I have a new area set up, a new repo, and it's just a copy of everything that's in Pixitron. The first thing I had to type was npm install, which installed the node modules for this package. I think we're ready to go, so let me just test it out. Now when I start this, you're not going to be able to see it running, but I'm just testing it for myself. Now the dot actually is not required. I just typed that for some reason. The dot, it becomes a parameter that you could pass the main executable, but in the other screen, I'm seeing a bunch of bunnies, and they're all floating around, flipping their whiskers. So everything's working. So I'm gonna get out of that. Let me pop over there. Now there still are some problems. We've got those scroll bars. We've got some other stuff going on. The engine is not set up for a turn-based strategy game. And I'm almost debating starting working on the back end. So how would you do that? Well, you're going to need to use some sort of SSH client. This one is called Terraterm. So I have a web server, a VPS, which runs the Lost Astronaut websites. I have access to a web folder. So I'm going to go into that web folder, and I'm going to make a new subfolder called Pixie Game, same as the repo that I'm using. It's pretty generic right now because we don't have a name for this game yet, but it's going to be a turn-based strategy game, possibly set either in a science fiction sort of future, or it's going to be set in the past, or it's going to be set, I've thought maybe time travel, but Bill and I will figure out what the best maneuver will be, and for now we're not going to worry about that. So the first thing we want to do is clone the GitHub repo for Papi, and that's going to put it into a subfolder called Papi, and we're going to bop that stuff out of the repo. Now we have yet another repo, and I'm actually going to go and create a repo that's separate for the backend so that we can commit the backend to a repo. So a little bit of wizardry there with Git, but it's how I could turn Papi So I removed what I did there, just to recap, is that I cloned Papi here. I moved it away from its Git folder. I deleted its Git folder. I deleted the Papi folder that's automatically created. And then I created a subfolder. In there, I cloned my private repo, and I moved the Git folder into here. So now I can do git add star, and that's going to add everything that you need there. Now I noticed that in Papi, we're actually missing a crucial file, which is the index, the .htaccess file. And that's just one of those things where, it's a little hurdle you have to get over. But when you go back to the repo, you'll see it's actually in there. So let me just go in here and make sure. I don't know if it's even in this. It's not. So what we're going to do, but I do know that some of the subfolders do have it. But let me just go back here to page. So we're going to go to the page repo. I mean, you could have done this any way you wanted to. You didn't have to use the htaccess file that I have, but we do happen to have a copy of it. It's right here. And it looks like this. So this doesn't work on every setup, but that's, it's fine for you to modify the way that the requests work. The subfolders do have the necessary folders. So we just put that in there. And then we're going to go ahead and chmod 0644.htaccess, and now there should be an htaccess file. Now we're going to git add again, git commit -a. We're going to commit everything. We're going to call this our initial commit for the Pixie game backend. All right, and then git push origin master. There you have it. First copy of the back end. So you really have to develop both sides of it from the very beginning. You can wait, you can do a lot in one or the other. I mean, there's certainly lots of things we're going to have to do, but it's probably best to keep into the project the two things you're going to need. So you're going to need Papi, and you're going to need the Pixitron copy. You can get rid of the Kiwan Papi Kiwan Papi ping. This is a screenshot of a. Get rid of some of these other files too if you want to, but I'll just leave them in there for now. All right, so there's the Papi schema, and in here you want to change the name of the database to something else. Keep in mind you can move your database later to like a high availability Amazon instance of MySQL. So it's up to you, but just changing the name to something else is helpful to start off with. In my case, especially since I already have Papi installed several places. So once that's done, I'm going to use MySQL to put the schema into the database. So let's go ahead and do that. Forgot the -p. So root -p. I've got that password there. So I'm going to introduce you to a new tool. It's called MySQL Workbench. It's free. It's great. Does a lot for you. It's by the MySQL people. For us, we're using MySQL Vanilla. You could do this with SQLite. You could do this with Flatfile. You'd have to make some modifications for Flatfile, but Papi does support SQLite. But for now, we're just going to stick with the vanilla sort of MySQL version that I have here. I don't really usually worry about what version of MySQL I have. But by the way, when you go to download this Workbench, there's a little link here that lets you just skip all this login stuff. So we're going to install that, although I believe I already have it installed. I have an earlier version. This is going to let me modify the database directly using that root password. And, I'm not going to get into best practices on how to manage the database security and all of that. There's plenty of resources out there for you to explore. that. But MySQL Workbench is a very useful way of doing this. If you don't like that, you can just use the command line tool, which is adequate for me, and I will be using that from time to time. But it's helpful when creating a lot of tables to go in here and do it. Although I will show you that in core, there is the database, there's the PDO area. And if you look at database.php, you can actually do some things in here, including creating a table. You can get the table list, and you can insert data into a table. You don't have to use MySQL Workbench, or some people like phpMyAdmin. I don't use that anymore, but that is another option here. But as long as you're able to go in there and create some new tables and develop your database that way, then that's fine. But if you're not familiar with MySQL Workbench, once you've installed it and run it for the first time, it looks like this. You want to add your connection, and we're going to call this the Pixigame DB. All right, the host name for me is that, and it's on the standard port. And we're going to call the default schema Pixigame DB, which is what we named it. And we're going to store this password in the vault. So let me just click OK. You could click test connection there, make sure it works. But I know what I'm doing, so I don't need to do that. But you could do that. And that's actually useful for doing things with AWS. Anyway, now you have your connection here. So you just click that. And it says that there's an issue. Oh, right. So the way that MySQL is set up on my setup is that I have to open up my IP, and I have a home file, so it's changed when it was upgraded. All right, so I was able to use cybercity.biz. How do I enable remote access? So it's basically grant all on pixidb.star to root at some IP address mine identified by a password. So I was able to do that a couple of tutorials later. I also did open up the firewall to my IP address just in case, using the unified firewall or the uncomplicated firewall of Ubuntu Linux. But anyway, that being done, now I have access to use MySQL Workbench on this computer. And I'm just going to open up my connection here, and after just a few moments, you'll see that this is opened up. A lot of these windows, I don't even use them, so I'm going to get them out of the way. And I know that this is really tiny, so I'm going to describe to you as I go through what I'm looking at. So here we have a set of tables, and these tables are the ones that are from the Papi schema. One is user, and session, and then app settings. So let's quickly look at app settings, and I'll just zoom in a bit here so that you can see exactly what's going on. Basically, there are 3 columns in this database, and pretty much are in this table, and pretty much all of them follow these methods. ID is always an integer. JSON in this case is the only field that's unique to this table, and then created, which is expecting a integer as well, and that's going to be a Unix timestamp. So if I looked at, for instance, session, you've also got an ID field that's an integer, not null, and a expires at, this is a timestamp. We've got r underscore user. Whenever I do that, that r underscore and then a table name, I'm giving a reference. So this session has a reference to a user in it. That's a foreign key in a way. And that's going to contain an integer that's not null. And then there's a session token, which is a string. So that's it for the session table. That's all you need to have a session. And that session will be acted upon by an ongoing process. Either when the user tries to use the session next, it's going to remove it. But of course, that would leave a lot of bad old sessions, sitting around in the database that you wouldn't need. So there's actually a process that can be automated that removes those sessions, say on a nightly basis, an hourly basis, whenever you'd like, usually during a maintenance time. And then you've got a user, and in this case, Papi was being made for a specific company at the time, so it's got a lot of stuff in here that you don't need, maybe, but these are just like the basic things you might need. Is the user an active account? If it's inactive, it won't let them log in. The username, clear text, and the password has been obscured via PHP 7's basic password obscurification stuff. So password hash and whatnot. So we have the obscured password, which is the proper way to handle the password. We've got username, which is a clear text username for searching for that user's profile, for instance. We've got an ID on that user, which is the reference point. So the foreign key of our user in session is going to have the same number as the ID of the user. And you can see here, we don't have any users in here at all. There's not even a guest account, which is a little bit strange. Let me run this query again, make sure. Yeah, there's no users in there at all. That's fine. That's strange. It would allow a user that didn't exist to log in. Maybe there's a little hack in there somewhere I'll have to remove. But SU, so this indicates, is it a super user? Another thing I like to store in databases, instead of an ACL, so you have an ACL is ACL, it's an access control level, and there's all sorts of elaborate ways to do that, but I just like to put tags in there, and then if you have the tag, you have the power. So SU is not a tag, it's a special bit, and then there's admin. So maybe SU allows you to switch to another user, whereas admin just allows you to administrate over other users. It's up to you. Company, you don't need this. It's just an example of like maybe some extra information you could store in there. The forgot key is a key that's stored on the user. Whenever they say, I've forgotten my email, it gets stored in there, and it gets an expiry date. And so when the user goes to click the forgot link in an email, it will go to a page that will ask it about this. This is actually from Page. It's not being used in Papi, but we can recreate that functionality, and we probably will, to get the accounts working again. So, you've got your email, your first name, your last name, whatever else you'd want to put in here, like the Twitter username or whatever the user would want to share with us, any codes or keys, or maybe how much they've paid in, if they bought Pixie Game coins or something like that. You would keep that information here. You can't keep credit card information, but you can keep information about their PayPal or whatever is working for your system. Maybe your game is free and you just pay for the client. That's probably one way to approach it. Maybe you allow users to log in, but then you only allow them to go to the leaderboards if they pay, or I don't know. There's ways to monetize. We're not going to deal with that today, but we are going to think about, what are we going to do here? So one thing I can tell you is that there's a special password in Papi and in Page that you can put in if you don't have a password, and that's a single space. If you put a single space into the password string, it's going to know that that's a single space and not a hash code. And it's going to know that you actually don't have a password for that, and you want to set a password. So it's going to allow you to log in with a single space when there's no password. So that's a little workaround there. Generally, users can't put, you have to validate data. So if a user puts in a single space for a password, that's never going to fly with a security protocol. So if they've forgotten their password, that's one route, but that route is not going to interact with the single space password. So there's that. Definitely works in Page. I'm actually not entirely sure if it works in Papi or not, but it's easy for us to generate a password hash, and then change it later. So I'm not going to get too much into user accounts today, but I just wanted to show you basically how to get into the database, how to look at it, and I think we should create one table. So there's a couple of different views here in MySQL, and there's a couple of different things going on. You can see all the previous queries down here. Over here you see the table information. So you've got int 10. It's a unique value, and it's auto increment, and it's a primary key. So that's how you create for any table. That's how you're going to create that ID. And it's always called ID. They're always capitalized. It is distinct from other things. And here you'll notice there's no created. There could be a created, the date that their account was created, if that information matters to you. What we're going to do is we're going to create a new table. So if you go in here, you can see there's little, there are the existing tables. Before we create a new table, let's just modify the user. And we're going to replace company. So I click the little wrench. And now I've got the table all set up, and I can change the name, but I'm not going to. So the name of this table user is echoed. Let's zoom out here. It's echoed in the model folder. So in the model folder, we have app settings, right? Session and user, and these are all PHP files. You'll see there are the 3 files, and really all you need to create a table, you don't have to have much. If I go into session, there's some stuff there. There's create new, refresh. These are all the things that happen around a session. And if I go into app settings, there's very little in here. There's just latest. Give me the latest version of their app settings, because I was going to allow multiple app settings. Now, app settings are application-wide. They're not based on users. And it was for the administrator to change settings for the entire thing. That's what app settings is for. So this would just get your latest one, and you could revert to previous versions, previous setups. And maybe I should add name or something like that. You can name them. But so all you need even less than this. So what you do is we're going to create a game. Okay, and the game table is very simple. Class game extends model, and that's it. That's all you need. Close the class up. It's all proper PHP, but that's all you really need. Everything else is taken care of for you. So let's go into tables. We're going to right click. We're going to create a table. All right. And this table is going to be called game, capitalized the same way. All right. And let's put a comment in. Let's say this holds the state for any active games or games that have already been played. All right. So you can store like a replay if you wanted to, or at least an outcome. What was the score? Who won? So we're only going to put a couple of columns in here. First is the ID, and it's an int, and it's a primary key, and it's not null, and it's unique. Or actually, I believe this is unsigned, not unique, unsigned. Right. Unique is, I don't use unique, you don't need it. And then auto increment. You could use unique there, but there's just no reason to. Because it's auto incrementing, it's going to be different. You don't want to do zero fill. And what's this last one? Generated column. I don't know. I don't need it. But there it is. That's an ID. So now we can have games. And we're going to have a general state, right? So the state of the game is going to be a long text. We're picking long text because, or we could even do a long blob, I guess. Or is it called long blob? No. Yeah, I don't know. Long text. And this is going to contain you can optionally make it not null, but null is fine. We're going to have a state called long text, and that's going to contain JSON. So down here in the comments for state, I can write JSON state of the current game. All right. We're also going to need some other data in here, and it's safe to put it outside of that. You can have everything in there. The reason why you wouldn't want to put everything inside of a long text JSON block is because every time you wanted to look up or search by that data, you would have to search the JSON, which is a string search. So you want other information. And what I like to do is I like to use a string. So our users, all right, so we have a user, but with an S there, that indicates it's a list. Okay, you could name this user list, you could name this whatever, but it's going to be a string. Okay, so a string in in the nomenclature of MySQL is a text of a certain length, or a tiny text, a medium text. What else we got? Do we have anything else? Use a blob. But I'm just going to pick a medium text. We don't need it to be a long text. And this is going to contain, I think I'm going to do not null for that too, but I'm not sure about that yet. I have to look at another table to determine if it needs to be not null. But what this is going to contain, down in comments I'll write, contains a comma delimited list of usernames, of user IDs associated with this game. Okay, so the participants. Now you could call it participants, and that's not a bad idea. But our users at least suggest that it's specific to that user list. Okay. In most turn-based games, you do have the concept of a host, but there is an initiator to a game, but the server is really the host, and all of the clients are equal; they're on equal footing with the host, with the server. So you could write host, you could write initiator. I'm going to write initiator. So this is the person who initiated this battle. Okay. And that's going to be an int. And it's going to be unsigned. And it's going to be not null. 0 for an ID is going to be the, person who, 0 means nothing. Doesn't mean a relationship. So if the initiator is 0, there wouldn't be an initiator. But that's just to call out who initiated the battle. Okay. Now we're going to add a couple other things. I created. Okay. All right, and that's going to be an int. And we're going to call that not null and unsigned. All right. So that's a date. So this is the date time stamp, just the time stamp of the game creation. All right. We're going to do a last played, which is also a timestamp. Okay, and this is there so we can detect if a game has gone stale. All right. And this is the timestamp of the last turn. All right. We're going to do a turn counter. So we're going to call that turn count. So it's a little bit more descriptive than just turn, although it could just be turn. And that's going to be a number, and we're going to increment that on our own. The server is going to be responsible for that value. So the comment is the turn number. All right. So there would be a way, quite easily, for the server to request this table, grab the user information, grab the term, and then determine whose turn it is. Okay. So that would be something like a JSON request, or it would be data that was packed into a JSON request for state. And in fact, we're going to call this last state, because state is really something that's generated on the fly. So the last state can be there. Now there's some setup for games. Let's have a name for the game, right? People name their games so their friends can identify them in a list. So we're going to call this game something, and it's going to be I'm not going to use varchar. I'm going to use text. In this case, we're going to use medium. Well, I can use tiny text. I think tiny text is like over a K of data. I'm not sure about that. I guess I could make that tiny text, or I can just make them all long text, to be honest with you. Doesn't really matter. What MySQL does is it ends up placing it in a file anyway, so no big deal. I don't even think I need to do the not nulls here, but I am. Well, we can leave them null. Let's just leave them null. Well, I like them being. All right. Well, I'll have to compare it to a different table, so I might be adjusting this table in a minute here. There's no way to open another table. Well, there is a table right here. Yeah, everything's not null, and some things are unsigned. So I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. All right. Not null. So for any int, but that's true for everything. So we'll just make everything not null. Okay, so I'm just keeping things, regulated. They're all going to be the same. Okay, so we've got the name of the game. We've got the initiator of the game. We might want to have some settings that are separate than the state of the game. So we're going to call this settings, and that's going to be another JSON, because the settings will probably change depending on what kind of game. Maybe you're playing a 1v1. Maybe you're playing a 1v2. And in fact, just to make searching easier, we're going to add player limit. All right. So player limit is going to be an int, and we'll set it to a good default value. I think a default value would be 2. Started off in like 2-player game. Okay. We got settings, long text, name, turn count, last play, created, users. Yeah. And then we need maybe like started, right? So started is really a true-false value, but we can turn it into a date time, but we're actually going to make it into an int for now. That's an unsigned int. So it's going to be 0 when it starts off, and that's because started is started equals 0, no, equals 1, yes. Right? So now we know what the enumeration here is. We know that it's a Boolean. No, it hasn't been started in that case. And what's great about using MySQL Workbench versus like doing this in the command line is that you get to put in all this extra data, and it just feels like you're making something. Whereas if you're using the command line, you're trying to minimize the amount of stuff you're inputting, right? So this is just a good way to do this. So it's not saved yet. So we don't really have the table in the list here. And the way that we're going to save that is click apply. All right. So now we see the SQL that's going to happen. I'm pretty happy with everything. So I would change, actually, I'm just going to change these to long text because I personally don't care to save that kind of like small amount in the end. And text would have been okay. Can I just do text? No, see, text wants to be a certain length. So we're just gonna make. I guess it makes sense. Save a buck. All right. We'll make this a medium text, although it's still huge. All right, so we're gonna click apply, and when I click apply, it's gonna create all of this. So we might want to do a couple other things real quick. One is because this is JSON, we're just gonna put an empty JSON in there. All right. And I hope I don't have to put that in quotes. I don't think I do. It'll tell me if I've made a mistake. Turn count is 0, meaning it hasn't started yet. You can set these to 0 because I think, you don't want... created 0 would mean it hasn't been created yet. Initiator 0, we don't have that yet. We don't need to list the users there, so that can be empty. ID is up to the database to decide because we put auto increment, unsigned, not null, primary key in there. Name we can call it game. I don't know, we could put something in there, but we don't have to. And then settings. So I don't know. Settings is going to be an empty JSON object. Oh, look, it put the quotes in there for me, so no big deal. And then name, we don't really need a name. We'll generate that name to some default value whenever the user creates the game, and then they can change it if they want to. Might be the date, might be the time, might be a random name, something funny, who knows. All right, I'm going to hit apply, and I'm going to click apply again. This is going to take this stuff, this SQL, and apply it to the database. It says there's an error. Let's see what it was. This holds a safe. Where is it? Error. There's an error. Blob text geometry column last date can't have a default value. So you can't set a long text. By the way, a text and a blob, same thing. So let's get rid of those. It's unfortunate, but we'll know that it's JSON. And in fact, we'll know that because we'll write in here JSON settings for the game. And up here, JSON state of the game. Apply. Apply. Okay, we were fine there. It's disappointing, but that's what we got. All right, so now there is a game. and there's the table. And obviously it is empty, but at least there is one. So you can create the first one. All right. It's a good time to save your schema so that it's empty, but we don't need to save it right now. And I am going to go into user here, and I am going to make a little change. I'm going to change company, and I'm going to change it to Twitter handle, okay, or just Twitter. All right, and we're going to make that a text. That's fine. That doesn't change. Apply, apply. Make sure you hit apply. It won't happen. There's all sorts of stuff you can look into here, but there's data export, there's import and restore, so you can save locally. You want to save a copy locally. There's a MySQL dump in here, and I can type the database or all databases and just do it on the server and then download it. So let's just do that real quick. Pixigame.db, and we'll call it on that. All right, minus u root minus p. Can't tell you. So there it is. There is the database. I could have echoed that into a file. So an example would be schema.sql, right? And now we have a schema that contains the updated data schema. But you don't want to leave these things lying around your website, so we're going to remove them. I trust that my schema is going to be there, and if not, I can always remake it. I don't really want to remake it, but I'm going to call it there. It's a lot of information, I'm sure, but that's how we're going to create a game that is created by a user. What we haven't done yet is implemented the, request. So just because it's in the database, it's not in the request. So I guess before I wrap up, well, it's been an hour. Well, before I wrap up, I will briefly head into the index.php and just show you around real quick. So you can ignore a lot of this stuff at the top. When we see global plog level, okay, so plog is the Papi log, and this just sets the level to 1, which means log everything. If you set it to 0, it wouldn't log, or if you didn't do this, if you just comment that out, it doesn't log anymore. And that'll give you a granular log of everything that happens on this website, which is fine for development, but you might want to cut it back if you're doing something, with a user that, production, if you go to production. So you can ignore this remove keys, only keys. These could probably be moved to the utilities. I just hadn't gotten around to it yet because it's really only used in this one file. And so far, everything is occurring in basically this one file. Yes, it includes, if you look up here, it includes core page, which gives you all of the page stuff, including the PDO, which is the data object, and the database connectivity stuff. But, hey, let's clean it up right now. So I left them in here. I didn't need to worry about this before, but I'm going to go ahead and grab onto the utility.php, and I'm just going to stick them in here instead. Now, everything in this file I like to pad, if you will. With a function exists. It's the convention. That way, if something gets included twice, although it's never probably going to be included twice, but there have been situations where it could happen. So we just do that, and now they've been moved. All right, so now you can get those out of there. There's a lot of cleanup that could be done in here, but I'll stop at that. So there's some other stuff. Starts with can be moved. So, well, honestly, it's being used only by is_SSL. So this is how SSL is detected. Why is this here? Well, this stuff is here because when a request is brought in, the way that you detect if it is coming in via HTTPS is by looking at the server super global variable and determining if it's true or not. And so I actually have SSL turned off, and I'm saying it's always SSL. If SSL were to return false, then it would reject the incoming request. And what this does is it forces Papi to work only on SSL. And we want that for production service, but we don't have a cert yet, and we don't have, the SSL thing is not active. It's not set up in the service. So we need a open-ended way. Now, this would not be a good way to launch a paid service or anything that collected even the names of the users who logged in, like their real names. So you want to turn SSL on because that gives us a secure thing. And frankly, you could hack other people's accounts. You need SSL HTTPS to be going on. But in our case, everything is just real laissez-faire right now. We're doing this on the back end. We're doing this for ourselves. So we've removed the requirement for SSL by commenting out these lines. And if you read this, all it tells you to do is go install your cert in your web service, which is a whole thing in and of itself. Get it signed and yada yada yada. You have to pay for that usually, and then you can turn it on just by doing that and commenting out this. All right, so that's why that's there. So we're just going to leave that commented out for now because we're not working on that. And then it's always going to be true here. Or actually, what this is doing is it's requiring us to come in. So this was exclusions. So if you did want to come in via SSL, you could. But if you had the same service on Hamachi, or if you were logged into the service itself and needed to check something from within the service, you wouldn't have to have SSL. But SSL is always turned on, so this doesn't matter. But that's what this is for. These are Hamachi IP prefixes. This is the prefix for localhost. And, don't worry about this right now. If you don't understand it, don't worry about it. Just leave it the way it is. It's fine for testing. Don't launch a service this way. By the time you go to launch your service, you should understand exactly what this is doing. And I pretty much explained it to you. So then here we have plog level 1. Like I said before, that's logging. And then we've got including the core page. We grab the current time. Then we do get post. So everything is wrapped up into the $G variable here. This is all of your get and post variables. Preferably they're post, but you might have some get variables. And then you just start testing against them. Was there no data sent? So every request that comes into this thing needs to have data sent with it. And if it doesn't have any data, then auth is going to tell you, hey, this isn't working out. We got to end this transmission right now. If you do have data, okay, and the data is essentially null, then there's data missing from this. So everything is packed into a JSON object that has exactly one property, data, and a second property, action. So if you have data and you have action, you have everything you need. Action could be like me, right? It could be like open. It could be like new game. That's an action. We talked kind of about this last time, and you saw the request, but this is how the request is being parsed. All right, then we have all these globals. What are these globals? Well, these globals are actually from the core/auth and the model/auth, and I believe shreds/auth. And it's just stuff you're going to want to know about globally for whatever you're working on. You need to know, is the user logged in? What's their session ID? What's their token? What database is active? So elsewhere, we've already loaded up the database, and we only want to do that once. So you can use this auth. $auth is a global variable that contains all the authentication information from the auth table. And then there's the user table. So the user table has the current user is in $user. $ is admin is true when that user is an administrator. Now in this particular, we saw the sample the other day. We've got login, logout, forgot me users, getting a list of the users, user, all of that. And you'll see here it says things like user : get users. So that's calling the model user and asking it to get you a list of the users. Now, in our case, we're going to have to modify that to be the users that are logged in. Maybe it'll be your friends. So there's some choices to be made there. And then you've got case user, case date time, and that's just going to give you the current time. It's useful for a server to give you that information sometimes, especially if you're trying to sync up. And finally, it's going to end the transmission with no action requested if you didn't do anything. So the action name, log out, forgot, identify, login, all that stuff is packed here into the action of the incoming request. So quite literally, all requests that come in are going to look like this: data, okay, and then it's like action me. That's the actual request. The thing that we were typing into the backend in the last video was just this part, okay. So if you don't have, it's just a little thing that stops like a random bot from coming by, but everything has to be packed into data, and there has to be an action. So if you did this, okay, but in addition to that, you have to also pack in some information about the session and the session token. So if you want to see how to create, you go into the Backend folder, which is something you want to remove from a production site, but you need it in the dev site. If you look in here under index.php, under the Backend folder of a Papi site, you can see that there's, you're going to start to see where all this gets put together. So there's the sample request. This is the page we're looking at. Now, if you send this request, it's going to use curl, and the way that it does this is it uses curl to send the fields of the form, and one of the form fields down here, let's see if I can find it, is data. So it's a form. All you have to do to make a backend of this is make an HTML form that posts data. So when I send a request, this page opens up, it gets the session token, it gets the administrator, and it gets the data. Literally starts populating these fields. So it says, okay, field, data, post data. All right, so whatever the data was. Then we're going to take the admin token, and we're going to pass that through the header. So you actually have a header here. In this case, the token is 3D, but that admin token should be privatized. Nobody should see that, okay? It should be hidden. Then you've got your session token. You're going to include that in your header, all right? And then curl's going to wrap that up and send it along. So when we create the AJAX request in Pixigame, it's going to have to follow this same format of data and then the two types of headers, the xPapi admin token and the xPapi session token, because that's what Papi is expecting to see. And if you go to a Papi site, so let's just go, okay, if we go to the actual site, you can see there's no API keys, right? Because it's expecting these keys, okay? And that's the problem. But here's an application ID, right? So the headers are the xPapi application ID, which in our case will change it. We're also going to change the admin token, and we're also going to change the session token. We might even eliminate the use of the admin token in a production site. But this allows us to, identify ourselves to the back end from the front end, which is the game written in Pixigame. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the video. Like and subscribe if you want to hear or see more of this. You're going to learn a lot about PHP. You're going to learn a lot about JavaScript. You're going to learn a lot about how to make a client and a server. It's going to be exciting, and eventually it's going to be fun. Thanks a lot. Signing off. Retro Friends.